After literally 4 months of waiting, we finally have episode 78 of Skibidi Toilet. And I'm going to speak with complete honesty because this episode has definitely been totally worth the wait. Not only do we now have a complete visual improvement in the animation, but also a total change in the atmosphere of the series, which fully justifies the waiting time. And after a long time, and as I always do on this channel, in this video I'm going to answer all the questions about Skibidi Toilet 78. This first question is very interesting, because here we see how, in a small alliance base, some cameramen and toilets had several humans taking refuge. Humans who, unlike those we saw in Season 25, don't seem to be Alpha Hills employees. Rather, it seems they were simply civilians who managed to survive. But there's something quite curious about these humans. If you take a closer look, 2 of them are wearing clothes that are far too formal for a conflict, which doesn't seem very important at first. However, if we compare them to the other humans in the same shelter, we can see that the others are wearing more apocalyptic clothing, so to speak. In other words, it's clear they've been having a rough time. This could indicate that those 2 humans were perhaps rescued from another previously established shelter, which was most likely attacked by an Astro, while the rest of the humans were simply survivors who managed to come across the Alliance, just like we saw in episode 77. The truth is that since his first appearances, this new Astro has raised quite a few questions, which are now easier to answer with the release of the episode. To begin with, this character is clearly based on Baraka from Mortal Kombat, who in his story belongs to a race known as the Tarkatans, beings with blades on their arms and huge teeth. Although in the latest game, these characters, instead of being a race, are simply people who have been infected. All of this suggests that, just like with Earth, the Astros invaded a planet inhabited by beings similar to the Tarkatans, who likely had powerful warriors that tried to defend their planet. However, in the end, they ended up being controlled, just like the TV Titan in episode 77, which seems to confirm that the Astros have more than one method of controlling their enemies, in addition to the core fucker. After seeing how the Astro Woman eats a human, we saw that the television men realized the Astros had managed to access all the cameramen's recordings. This most likely happened because the TV Titan is now being controlled by the Astros, who probably repaired his screen and forced him to display those recordings, thereby exposing many of the Alliance's locations. It seems that the television men stored all of this in their second base, which very likely has a room separate from the rest where all those screens we saw were located. And I must say, something curious is that the television men have the ability to hack the cameramen, which is quite reminiscent of what the secret agent or his partner used to do. But anyway, even though practically the entire Alliance has now been exposed to the Astros, there is still hope thanks to the fact that the TV Titan took the cannon away from Astro Yogane. As we already saw in episode 75 and in this episode 78, the Alliance and the toilets are currently working together. And it seems they are coordinating quite well within just a few hours, since the toilet and cameraman scientists were able to create all kinds of new weaponry, such as the energy guns used by the hybrid toilet that recorded this episode. Something curious is that this hybrid toilet seems to have a strong affinity for guns. Yes, you saw that too. It also seems that the new television men we saw in the episode were upgraded by the toilets and cameramen. I say this because although the television men's base was destroyed, it was too damaged to keep functioning anyway, which could have caused them to go get upgraded at the camera base. It's just that, for some strange reason, the TV scientist doesn't appear anywhere in that base. This is definitely one of the most important pieces of information in the entire episode. Here we were able to see how the television men teleport, accessing a dark dimension where you can see the past, the future, and other things that, honestly, I can't exactly explain what we're seeing, whether they are alternate dimensions or something else. I honestly didn't fully understand that scene. But the most important thing is that any being who stays inside for too long can go insane. Just like what happened to a television man named Jeffrey, who most likely was one of the first prototypes ever created. All of this about the dark dimension had already been shown to us in episode 77, where, after spending some time there, a hallucination of the human TV scientist was generated. What I want to highlight is that practically this dimension seems to hold the key to defeating the Astros. Just think about it. What would happen if somehow the television men could trap the Astros in this place forever? Or if one of them stayed inside for a long time to see something from the future and thus anticipate an attack? Although, to be honest, it seems unlikely that any of this will happen. If you think about it, the TV scientist had the ability to teleport for a while, during which he possibly came up with the same idea I did and tried to execute the first option against the Alliance. It's just that maybe he realized achieving it was completely impossible, and that the only way to trap someone there would be to drag them in by force, which would be unorthodox and very risky. But the second option is more likely, since maybe the scientist did manage to see something from the future during his conflict with the Alliance, and that might have allowed him to know what the Astros were doing in episode 60. This is definitely the part that everyone has been talking about in this episode. The return of the Speakermen was absolutely brutal and impressive. They now have technology that is completely superior to that of the rest of the Alliance races. But although this return and their new upgrades are very impressive, it's also true that their powers and designs feel a bit exaggerated or oversaturated, since their evolution has been very radical. This big change has a pretty interesting explanation. It seems that the Speakermen now possess the power of Astro Yogurn's cannon. I say this considering that in episode 77, the TV scientist mentioned that the Speakermen were preparing for what the TV Titan said was his plan, which left us quite confused since, in the end, the Titan and the Speakermen never fought together or anything like that. Therefore, it seems the true plan of the TV Titan was to steal Astro Yogurn's cannon and give it to the Speakermen so they could upgrade themselves, since the energy of the cannon and theirs is quite similar. Most likely, it wouldn't be very difficult for them to understand and adapt to that technology, unlike other factions. Also, since the television men's base was badly damaged, they wouldn't have been able to study or replicate the cannon, as they did with the Claw. But even though the Titan managed to complete his plan, he ended up being controlled by the Astros. Maybe that's why the Speakermen now wear crosses, because they are mourning the presumed death of the TV Titan. And finally, I'll share some theories and curiosities about the episode. Starting with the theories, it's quite likely that in episode 79, we'll see the return of the Titan Speakerman, who might face none other than the Doom Watcher. Another theory is that we will continue to see more of this new Astro toilet, since he managed to escape in the end. A theory related to the previous one is that we'll probably see new types of Astros, similar to the one in this episode, who would be inhabitants of other worlds conquered by the Astros. As for the curiosities, in this episode we saw the return of the camera toilets, both at the beginning of the episode and when the recording hybrid arrives at the battle. In the opening scene, it seems that the place where the Alliance is located used to be an old toilet laboratory, since in one part we see one locked up just like in Alpha Hills. In that same scene, we can see a human who is a reference to the Punisher. One of the refugee women looks a bit like Rochelle from the video game Left 4 Dead. This is the first episode narrated from the perspective of a hybrid toilet. We also see the destruction of the YouTube offices once again. It's the first episode where one of the Speakermen speaks. Friends, those are all the facts and curiosities from this episode. Remember to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.